Today we're going to take a look at Chronowarden, one of the hero talent tree choices for preservation and augmentation evokers in the War Within. The most interesting part of Chronowarden so far is that there are 4 talents, the ones highlighted in pink in the middle and the red one, that look to be taking preservation evokers in particular in a new and quite interesting direction. It looks like Blizzard are playing around with a power infusion or blessing of summer sort of damage amplification support idea with the pink highlighted talents in the middle, although this set of talents looks to be far more interesting than abilities like power infusion or blessing of summer. And the talent highlighted in red is another theme or idea for a talent that we haven't seen yet, and that is a kiss curse kind of idea, a talent that has powerful positives and negatives built into it. The damage amplification talents, the pink ones in particular, are quite in-depth to talk about, so I'm quickly going to knock over the other 3 first. For defense and utility style of talents, we have Warp, which reduces the cooldown of hover by 5 seconds, and a choice node to either cause our hover to give us a damage reduction starting at 30% and reducing down, I'm guessing, to 0 over 2 seconds, so a powerful but very short duration bursty defensive. And that's on a choice node with motes of acceleration that allows us to what looks like give at least one, maybe more members of our party a significant movement speed bonus, 20% for up to 30 seconds when we use hover. As for the green talents, the returning mechanics, we get 2 of Preservation's greatest hits, I would say, as far as set bonuses go. We get Reverberations that gives us back the old set bonus that gives Spirit Bloom a healing over time effect tacked on to the end of it. And we get the Capstone, which is After Image, which isn't an exact copy but is functionally the same as the current set bonus that causes us to shoot out living flames when we use an empowered spell. But with After Image, it won't be living flames, it'll just be shooting out other little things that don't do anything other than, it looks like, give us a chance to proc Essence Burst. So very similar to what we currently have, but a talent that I am actually really quite happy seeing continue on. As for the yellow highlighted talents, the new functionality is what I'm calling anything that gets added on to existing spells that isn't just a flat passive. Like some of the other healers I criticized in my previous videos because they had talents that were just like, wild growth is 20% stronger or something quite boring and numeric. New functionality is a little bit more than that. Our first free talent we get at 71 causes Living Flame to repeat 15% of the damage or healing we've done to the target we hit with Living Flame in the past 5 seconds, but it is up to a fixed amount. Primacy causes the healing over time effect that gets tacked on to Spirit Bloom to give us a haste buff, 3% per target up to 9%, which also means because it's tacked onto the healing over time, it's also for 8 seconds after pressing Spirit Bloom. And Instability Matrix is a random cooldown reduction of up to 15 seconds of an empowered spell we cast. I am guessing that this is going to be random from 1 second to 15 second cooldown reduction, so it should average out to about a 7-second reduction on all of our empowered abilities, which is pretty strong. Now to the very interesting Kiss Curse talent. This is on a choice node, Careful Contemplation. Our intellect and stamina is increased by 10%, but our cooldowns are increased by 10%. So the positive of 10% intellect and stamina, but with the negative of 10% longer cooldowns. Now, this doesn't seem very balanced right now. If the 10% intellect and stamina as a positive were to be properly balanced against the negative part of the increased cooldowns, the increased cooldowns would probably have to be more like 15 or even 20% increased. But this is a very interesting direction to take Preservation. And I say Preservation in particular because it is the healer at the moment that I think relies the most on cooldowns, especially when you think about not just the longer cooldowns, but all the shorter ones too, like Verdant Embrace and all of your empowered abilities. But yeah, 10% intellect and stamina is a pretty huge upside. The choice node it's on is with Time Convergence, which again is a very interesting talent because it doesn't have the drawback of having the curse. It's just abilities with a 45-second or longer cooldown grant 10% intellect for 15 seconds, and defensives with a similarly long cooldown do the same for stamina for 15 seconds. Essence spells extend the duration of both of these effects by 1 second. I like what Blizzard have done here because they've given effectively the same amount of power as the passive without the drawback, but it requires a lot more planning and forethought and active play and good play, rotating your cooldowns effectively in order to get full value out of it. Once this choice node gets balanced, like let's say the cooldowns get increased on Careful Contemplation to 15 or maybe even 20%, I would say this is one of the better choice options out of any of the choice nodes I've seen so far for any healer, because it allows for a passive that you don't have to do anything for that's powerful, but comes with a drawback. Or if you want to instead choose to have a little bit more control, but also a little bit more risk of screwing it up, you can take time conversions, which is, I think that's just fantastic design. That should reward good play, but also make it not a tedious thing for everyone to have to play around if they don't want to, because they can just take Careful Contemplation as a passive and get almost the same value out of it. Onto the pink highlighted abilities, the damage amplification. This set of 3 talents will all work together to, I think, produce some pretty powerful results. So Tip the Scales is Preservation's 2-minute cooldown that makes their next empowered spell instant cast and cast at maximum rank. And Temporal Burst, the first talent, will tack on a buff for 20 seconds after pressing Tip the Scales that will increase haste, movement speed, and cooldown recovery rate by 2%. Now, I'm assuming that goes up by 2% every second for 20 seconds, which means at the end of it, it will be at 40% haste, movement speed, and cooldown recovery. Very powerful. Threads of Fate will mean that every time you use an Essence ability, so Echo or Emerald Blossom, while your Temporal Burst buff is active for that 20 seconds, you will spread a buff to a nearby ally that gives them a chance for them to replicate 15% of the damage or healing they deal. So if that was a 100% chance to proc that effect, it would be a straight 15% buff, right? Doesn't sound huge, but because it's procced off Essence abilities, we're going to be able to have quite a few of these out, especially if we really plan for it before we tip the scales. So that could be in a raid setting, maybe even like 5 or 6 of these Threads of Fate buffs out. Or in a Mythic Plus setting, we have an ability to increase the effectiveness of that up from the 15%. And that's through the choice node at the end there. Master of Destiny causes our empowered spells to increase the effect of Threads of Fate by 100%, stacking up to twice for 8 seconds. Or Golden Opportunity, which causes Echo to have a 25% chance to not cost Essence. So what that means is if we really want to play around this, we should have the ability in Mythic Plus, let's say, and we take Master of Destiny to buff up the effect of Threads of Fate by 300%. We should be able to press Tip the Scales and go into that with 2 Essence Burst stacks and full Essence. So we should have no problem pressing Tip the Scales, getting our haste buff and everything, and our cooldown reduction, and then using our Essence abilities to spread in Mythic Plus easily 3 Threads of Fate on all of the DPS in the group. And then press Spirit Bloom, Dream Breath, and Fire Breath to buff all of those Threads of Fate by 300%. So each DPS in the group would be replicating or echoing 45% of their damage if the proc chance on that was 100%. Now, it definitely won't be, and we don't know what it is, but we do know that the Threads of Fate buff will be somewhere between a 0 and 15% buff to DPS. And we also know that if we take Master of Destiny, we can triple it. So assuming it is somewhat noticeable or somewhat impactful without Master of Destiny, let's say you take Golden Opportunity in a raid instead so that you can press Echo more often to spread more of the Threads of Fate on more targets. And if that is impactful without Master of Destiny, then being able to take Master of Destiny and play around it in a smaller scale environment means this should be a pretty impactful buff and way to play. Like, I don't think we're going to be pressing all of those buttons in that sequence and then increasing 3 DPS's damage by 45% for 8 seconds, because that would be insane. But I do expect it to be somewhat noticeable. Probably on similar kind of levels as Power Infusion, dare I say, or at least Blessing of Summer. What I like about this set of 3 talents is, first of all, that they all synergize together. I think that's really fun. I like that. I like the way that they are tied in and hook into multiple different parts of the preservation toolkit. And that's why at the beginning of the video I said that I think this mechanic is better than Power Infusion or Blessing of Summer, because as a healer I like those kind of mechanics being more than just mouse over a nameplate and press one button. So that seems very fun, and I think the final choice node is also really well done, really well designed. In small scale content, if you really want to use a lot of your abilities to help push damage, you can. Or in a raid environment, it feels like you would be able to take Golden Opportunity and not worry too much about having your empowered spells or banking them for this use in particular, but you know that you could just press tip the scales and spread some more damage to your raid while you do your normal healing buttons. So I think all of that's really fun. As far as grading the spec according to the criteria that Blizzard laid out in their blue post, their hero talent tree manifesto, so to speak. The first criteria is there enough damage or healing on the tree to be significant but not overshadow the class or spec tree? That is a definite yes. The damage and healing is definitely there. This tree is probably the most overloaded or like obviously powerful trees that we've seen so far. Some of the other ones, like the Holy Paladin weapon tree, we just don't know how powerful any of those abilities are going to be, so it's difficult to say. But for things like the returning mechanics 2 abilities here, the extra essence burst that the current set bonuses give for preservation that the capstone is more or less replicating are pretty substantial. I would say somewhere between like 5 to 8% at the moment. Back when the Spirit Bloom set bonus was in, that we're getting back with reverberations, I think that accounted for something like 10 to 12% of our healing at the time. So just those 2 returning mechanic talents alone are probably something like 15 to 20% healing, maybe more. The Kiss Curse talent is another straight up 10% healing pretty much. So yeah, the tree has a lot of power to it. Probably the most out of any healer. I think it's pretty conservative estimate to say that this tree right now in its current form has at least 30% HPS on it for the way most preservation evokers play. Does it overshadow the class and spec tree? Maybe. Well, I guess that's difficult to say. We'll see. For criteria 2, are both trees roughly balanced in PvP, Mythic Plus and Raid? We're not sure because we haven't seen the Ruby Adept tree. However, I find it difficult to imagine a Ruby Adept tree that is as powerful as this. So tentatively, I would say no, I can't see these being balanced unless Ruby Adept is like crazy powerful, just like this one is. Then no, they won't be balanced. Number 3, does the tree feel required due to one talent feeling mandatory? Again, difficult to say. We don't really know what's on the Ruby Adept tree, but it's going to have to be a pretty fantastic tree to compete with this. Not just in power, but if you think about what this tree brings for preservation, it brings what should be quite a lot of damage, because even the Kiss Curse talent, the 10% intellect, that's going to affect damage and healing. The damage amplification talents will affect damage. The capstone will also proc more essence bursts, which again will affect damage. The initial opening passive causes Living Flame to also contribute more damage. So Ruby Adept is going to have to really bring a lot to compete with this tree. It's going to have to bring healing power and a lot of damage potential and some group utility, or else the hover movement speed bonus I could see feeling fairly mandatory in some group settings. So yeah, we can't really say for sure, but I doubt it's going to be balanced. We'll see. And the final criteria is, does the tree affect your capabilities, rotation, combat focus, or user interface? That's a resounding yes. The damage amplification trio of synergistic talents I think will change, or at least it might not change the way you play around Tip the Scales, but it at least provides extra functionality if you want to. If you want to try and contribute as much damage as possible, then yeah, it's going to change what you focus on, what cooldowns you combine together, it will have a big impact. Will it affect your rotation and capabilities? Absolutely yes. And I would say a big part of that is from the Spirit Bloom getting the healing over time effect added, as well as primacy granting the quite significant haste buff of 9%. That could be definitely worth playing around if you want to in some situations, especially again even for damage if you want to too. And instability matrix will be changing a lot of what you focus on or what cooldowns you're planning to use and when, because you might randomly get a lot of cooldown reduction or then not get any the next time you press it. So it's going to require a fair bit of flexibility. Overall, this looks like by far one of the most powerful healing talent trees, while also being the most fun, the coolest. I'm really excited to get into hopefully beta and test this out. It seems like a really well-rounded tree with a lot of power, a lot of fun, a lot of tie-ins and hook-ins to the rest of the spec, and it doesn't have like boring passives like a lot of the other healing specs do. Going back and looking at like the Resto Druid talents that are just, oh, Wild Growth is 20% stronger, or your Rejuve is 6% stronger, or your Life Bloom is 4% stronger, seem so boring and small compared to what Preservation looks to be getting. We'll see how balance goes. This tree's probably going to get nerfed pretty heavily, I would say, but I still think it's a lot of fun there and it should be really good. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and algorithm stuff.